Welcome to the Founder Hour podcast. I'm your co-host, Pat. On this episode, we chat with Stephen Galanis, co-founder and CEO of Cameo. Cameo is a video sharing platform that allows celebrities such as Snoop Dogg, Caitlyn Jenner, Carole Baskin, and over 40,000 others send personalized messages to fans such as birthday shoutouts, congratulations, and more. The company has seen a meteoric rise since launching in 2017, so we were excited to sit down with Stephen to see what it's all about. We talk about everything from Stephen's upbringing and various entrepreneurial ventures leading up to Cameo, his biggest takeaways from his experience working at LinkedIn, the skills he gained early in his career that helped his development as a leader, his timely advice for entrepreneurs, and what sparked the idea that ultimately became Cameo. Stephen also shares how they were able to acquire top talent early on, the importance of founder market fit, the innovative pricing model that allows celebrities to capitalize on their fame while providing value for their users, and how he sees the ever-changing social media landscape as a farm system for Cameo. We started off the conversation by taking it all the way back to Stephen's early days growing up in Chicago.
Cool. I'm from Chicago. I'm from the North Shore of Chicago, a town called Glenview, Illinois. I grew up in a Greek American family, so my dad's actually from Sparta, actually from Sparta. So I always grew up, hearing about the great things that my ancestors did, and how Greeks were basically better and faster and smarter than everybody else in every way. So I think it gave you, probably irrational confidence early in life. I played a lot of sports. I was a hockey player, football player, baseball player, soccer player, played through college. Also, academically, I was a policy debater. I was class president. So I was kind of that person that just did everything, which was a lot of fun. Ended up going to Duke after that, which was just a place where I found there were a lot of people that were extremely talented in a lot of different facets. But it's not the most intellectual place, but it's some place where like everyone you meet is like smart and has a personality and things like that. So that was a really good fit for me. And then after that, I was an options trader for my first 5 years out of college. You're coming from Chicago. That's kind of the king industry. If you grow up in LA, you probably want to be a movie producer. If you grow up in New York, you want to work on Wall Street. But if you grew up in Chicago, like you want to be an options trader. And I did that, and I was really fortunate to kind of get a chance to cut my teeth in the pits of the Chicago Board of Trade, and that was a really exciting place for me to spend the early years of my career.
Was that something that you, like an options trader, was that something you wanted to be from like a young kid? Like, was it something that was forced upon you, or you had family members doing it and you were like, I want to do that? Or did you sort of figure that out once you got to college?
My family had always been very big in the market. My grandfather was a stock trader and actually had a photography studio that's been around since 1945. It's the oldest continuously run studio in Chicagoland. My other uncle was a movie producer and still is. But the stock market was just something, like I grew up in a house where CNBC was on the TV every single day. My grandfather, I remember even before like CNBC was a thing, he had this little device before cell phones that was just like an automated stock ticker. So I just grew up fascinated by the markets. And when I thought of the parents of my friends who were most successful, who had the big houses on Lake Geneva, which is like the Chicago equivalent to the Hamptons, they were basically all options traders. They were all they'd all made their money at the Chicago Board of Trade. So I think subconsciously that always felt like a place where you could go in as someone like smart and scrappy, and like you're only going to be held back by kind of your own ability. And now I think in Chicago that's what people grow up wanting to do.
So I know you mentioned you went to Duke. Why'd you choose Duke? What did you study? What was that whole experience like for you?
Yeah, it's kind of funny how I ended up at Duke. I was actually supposed to go to Tulane to play football, and I'd signed a letter of intent. And then Hurricane Katrina ended up happening my senior year of high school. So at that point, there was no, like, we didn't know if New Orleans as a city would even exist. And then, for the first time, I started thinking about, well, where would I want to just go as a student? And, I love sports. I love academics. I'm from, in the Chicagoland area, you're surrounded by all the Big Ten schools. So the Michigans, the Wisconsins, the Ohio States of the world. And there's just so much pride in Chicago. You go to my neighborhood I grew up in, the Michigan flags are hanging and the Notre Dame flags are hanging. But my mom, who is from Chicago, went to Arizona State. And her one rule for me, she's like, I want you to go to another region and kind of like learn a different part of the country. So for me, it really kind of came down to at the end, finding a school that was, full of like smart people that had a lot of school spirit, that had like, A+ sports and just like great campus life. So for me, it was like Duke and USC were kind of the two at the end. And I went to, and I love college football. And this is at like the peak of USC's reign, Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, like, as somebody that loved football as much as me, that was like the place to go. And I ended up going down to Durham to go visit a friend who was the captain of the football team at Duke at the time. And they had lost 24 games in a row. I think it was like an NCAA record. So like they were the shittiest team in the country. And the weekend that I went, they beat VMI. It was the first win in like 2 years. It was a beautiful summer day in North Carolina. And like, I was just hooked. I knew that's where I was going to go to school from the second I stepped on. And, one of the really cool things that happened to me there was actually this guy that I met, Zach Maritas, who today is the founder of a company called Teamworks, which is, a Series C company out of Durham. Zach and I, we're really close. We grew up together. Our families are really close. We're both Spartans. We're both Greek from the same neighborhood in Glenview, Illinois. And I was the freshman. He was the senior captain of the football team. And this was the days when Facebook was only for people with the .edu address. So Zach and I started a business called Spartan Entertainment, where we basically, in a world where the bars couldn't promote themselves, we started a Facebook group that ended up having 17,000 college students in it 4 years later. And we ended up like running all the nightlife at Duke University. So this was my first like real entrepreneurial hustle. I was a history major, but anybody that knows me like knows that I majored in business, even though Duke doesn't have a business school. And I don't think it's surprise to anybody that went to Duke during that era that Zach and I are both running, pretty big tech companies at this point. We honed our chops as CEOs. At that point, we learned, what it's like to be an owner, like what it's like to do everything from, at the early days, you're counting money, your other people are at your parties, drinking, having a great time, but like, you were there for work. It wasn't for play. And I think that was a pretty formative experience for both of us.
And so I'm assuming this is like mid to late 2000s, right? Going to when you're in college?
Exactly. I was 2006. So, I mean, I literally remember the days where, I remember getting into University of Illinois because they were on rolling admissions, and like everyone wanted to be on Facebook so bad that people would put down deposits to get, the .edu address so you could get on Facebook. So I was literally the first grade of person who was on Facebook for, my whole 4 years. And looking back at it, that was a really powerful thing because, every single person that I met got into this network. And, I think that was my first, the first time where I realized like network effect businesses and what those could be. And as we built this business up, Spartan Entertainment, it started with throwing Wednesday night beer pong at a bar, but it ended up being a college moving business. We had a t-shirt company, we had a DJ company, we had an event venue rental company. We were doing limos, like all types of stuff. So we realized that if you aggregate enough people and you provide value to them consistently, you don't just have to sell the one product. You can keep selling other things to them. And I think that's a value that I've taken, in a lesson I've taken with me to Cameo.
And did you like set out to start a business from the beginning? Like when you were even prior to college, did you see yourself as a business owner or entrepreneur, or was it something that was more like opportunistic? You saw an opportunity, you're like, hey, we could take advantage of this, and we wanted ourselves, so why not just put it out there? Like what was your approach?
I believe entrepreneurs are born, not made. I think there's 3% of people on earth who are just born to be entrepreneurs. Like they can go be employees, but they're never going to be the best employees. They ultimately have to be running the show. They have to be not only parts of winning teams, but they need to be the reason why they win. And I was always wired like that. You know, I was an entrepreneur through college, and then for me, honestly, the first 7 years of my career were pretty tough. Like you're going from like being a boss and running this like pretty big business in college where I was making over six figures a year in cash like as a college student, to suddenly like going to Chicago and being a clerk at the Board of Trade for 35 grand a year, getting people like coffee, like screwing up their lunch orders. And like the hardest thing I had to do is pick which movie we were going to watch. So like that I think for entrepreneurs is really tough. And the advice that I'd give is like, hey, even if you don't have like the best idea, if you're an entrepreneur, just keep hustling because you're going to learn so much. And there's probably 7 years of my professional career that I would take back if I could, because this is my first rodeo in the tech space. But I wish this was probably my second or third company by now.
But just to play like sort of devil's advocate there, because I totally agree with you. Like if it's something that you innately are and you want to be business owner, entrepreneur, then just go out there and put yourself out there and get it done, and you'll build experience along the way. But also, I think there's something to be said in a lot of cases where you could get this professional experience in the real world that can help you become a better entrepreneur and actually increase your likelihood of success, because you've seen it. You kind of know how an organization is run, because it's not just about starting a business. At some point you have to raise money, you have to start managing people, and if you don't have that experience, it might take a little bit longer for you to gain those skills. So I guess for you, did you see your professional career as something that helped you become a better entrepreneur when you started Cameo? Or was it like, if you could go back, you would have rather just ran your own businesses and learned that way?
I'd rather go back, and absolutely, with one exception. I did have 2 years at LinkedIn right before, and to me, that was really formative. While I had other businesses that were tech enabled, LinkedIn gave me like this opportunity to actually learn about, what is it like to work at a technology company? Why is culture important? Why is recruiting important? So LinkedIn was the formative experience of my professional career. My point is like, I wasn't doing anything at LinkedIn that like changed the world. I always joke, Jeff Weiner and Mike Gamson from LinkedIn are two of our early investors. And I always joke that the market cap of the company, declined pretty badly from the time I joined. I think when I joined, the stock price was at 219, and we ended up getting sold for $196 2 years later. So I always joke that I was like a net negative, to LinkedIn. But what I learned a lot about was culture. At LinkedIn, Jeff Weiner would get on stage every single all hands, and he would say, "Talent is our number one priority." And like I didn't really understand that. As an athlete, I got that you won by having the best players and getting them to work together, right? But I think like on a business perspective, it wasn't something I thought about. Coming up as a trader at the Chicago Board of Trade, I'd never worked with any women before. The pit was 300 men, and the only women that worked at my trading firm were basically working in HR, or they were back office clerks. So, going to LinkedIn and hearing people like Mike Gamson talking about, hey, at the senior levels of LinkedIn, 15% of our director level hire people are women, but we need to make that 50-50 in the next, 3 years. Like hearing people talk about things like that, diverse teams win. These were just ideas I was not exposed to in the pit. And I'm thankful. I'm really thankful I had that stop in my career. But that said, like I think I could have also, my years trading, like maybe 1 year of that was great, but like I think 4 of them, I should have just been doing, some startup, and you learn so much more. I joke all the time, like you learn more, in your first year of running a startup, even before you have employees or raise money, than you probably did in, all of college. So, to me, there's nothing replaces just doing it.
Steven, I'd love to touch on the culture bit when we, transition into Cameo and just kind of delve deeper there. But, you talk about this 7 years of hustle and, just kind of going all over the place, doing a bunch of different things. Was that ever stressful? I mean, did it cause you anxiety? Did you feel like you had no idea what your future was going to look like? Or is that something that you enjoyed? I think I've been in that position. I know Pat's been in that position. A lot of our friends have been in that position where early on in their careers, that first, 5 to 10 years, you're like, I don't know what the rest of my life is going to look like. I want to start a family. I want to buy a house, have this and that, but I'm nowhere near there. So what was your mentality? Like, I'm curious because I know a lot of our listeners will want to hear that and maybe even, learn something from it.
Look, I have a funny story about that. I remember in 2016, I was at a birthday party, and a friend of mine from high school named Jesse Shaman, who I hadn't seen in about 5 years, came up, and I'm working at LinkedIn. I got a great job. I'm making a lot of money. Like outwardly, it seems, like anybody objectively would say, like I was pretty successful at that point. And Jesse goes up to me, and I hadn't seen her since high school. She basically goes, Steven, like, I'm so disappointed in what you've become, right? Like, I had so much higher expectations for you. I thought you were going to be the president of the United States one day. And basically, like, you're a bum, you're working at LinkedIn. And like, that was just one of those things where it's like, well, first off, it's like, well, screw you, Jesse. Like, I like what I'm doing, like all that type of stuff. But, on reflection, I remember seeing her a couple years, later, and, Cameo starts, rocking and things are going well. And then she's like, you know what? Hey, I'm really proud of you. Like you're finally doing what we all thought you were going to do. So I do think that there's certainly something there. I also think too, as I look back to my time trading, or I look back to my time at LinkedIn, I was someone that had like side hustles that were always in sports and entertainment. When I was a clerk, I was running like a sports book, out of the pits of the Chicago Board of Trade. I started a film investment fund, and I produced, 2 television shows and like 3 or 4 movies, raising money from guys in the pit. Like I would win my fantasy football leagues all the time. I was, had, tickets to all the games. So like I found myself like when I should be concentrating on, on what the, SPX, trades were doing. Like I just found myself like, caring about sports. And I do think there's certainly something to, making sure that you find whatever you try to get into, it needs to be something that you actually love doing, not that you just think it's a big idea, because, it's going to be, you're going to probably have to work for free for a couple of years, and you better like be obsessed with the field that you're in. Otherwise, like somebody's going to have more passion for it. And, even if you're working equally as hard, they'll eventually beat you.
I think one of the biggest areas of anxiety that early entrepreneurs face, and this was the case with me, still is the case with me, is it's sort of like, okay, I'll take the leap, I'll take the risk, I'm willing to pursue this idea and see it through, but it's kind of like, all right, just in case it doesn't work out, what are my options? Like, what are my transferable skills? A lot of people are technologically savvy, like they could code and they could engineer from a young age. Some people are just good at talking to people and sales. It sounds like you were more like in a sales position at LinkedIn, yeah. And that was kind of like your strong suit. But like, I think that's where it comes from. So I guess in terms of like your early career, like what were some of the skills that you got that you think helped you, when you actually started Cameo and started, building this business?
I think actually learning sales at LinkedIn was really great. I'm somebody that always had good natural sales skills, but just like learning about, prospecting and how to pipeline and all that type of stuff. And look, I think that I have like really good natural skills at that, but I was not going to be like a club level performer, at LinkedIn, because it just turns out like I'm better at a different type of sale. Like, in another world, like I probably could have been a college football coach, and I would have been pretty good in the living room, like getting somebody's mother to say like, hey, you should come play football for Coach Galanis over there. And at the end of the day, like that, I think those were some of the skills that I really learned. The big one in trading was really like the value of 2 things. I remember my very first day of work trading, and the head of the firm pulled everybody in, of the new hires. And he's like, look, you guys are all new. You're going to screw up a lot of things. You're going to lose us a lot of money. That's fine. Like, there's only 2 rules that you have to go by. Number one, like, if you lie about anything, like, we will fire you. Like, it doesn't matter how small the lie is, because if you lie about little things, you'll lie about big things. And then secondly, like, I don't care what you do outside of work, but you need to be there for the opening bell every day. Like, it doesn't take any skill to just show up and be on time. And I think like having those lessons and having integrity drilled in really early in my career, and, and having like reliability drilled in, early in my career. Those were two important lessons that, I think in many ways I think they're kind of lost a little bit on this like younger generation. Right now, if like when I was trading, we had to be there at 5:15 every single day, right? And we were staying until 7 o'clock. And now, if you do that, if I did that to like my sales team, they're writing a book about that someday, or there's some article about, how we're a toxic startup culture. So there's just so many things that I think taught foundational skills that, you just can't really do in 2020. And that's something that I think like a lot of people are having to deal with right now.
So, Stephen, you talk about your friend kind of telling you that, he's disappointed that you haven't turned out to be this, incredible human being, early on in your career, even though you're still a young dude in your 20s. What does that make you do? I mean, do you go back to the drawing board and say, okay, I had a business in college. I was doing well. I wanted to be president of the United States. I've always been a leader. Here I am, selling somebody else's, product, albeit I love LinkedIn. You should probably get a LinkedIn picture, considering, you work there. Just kidding. But where did the idea come from for Cameo, or did it? Or, what were you doing? Because clearly you had realized that you need to do something else.
So I do have a LinkedIn picture. We must be the third connection or something. It's definitely there. I used to have to teach bankers how to put pictures, so my picture's there for sure. Secondly, I think that I knew I wanted, by that point, I knew I wanted to start something. But I think, kind of I remember Barry Bonds, for example, when he had his 73 home run season. There was some crazy stat where he swung and missed at 5 pitches the whole year. I think when you get to a certain point in your career, and this is why I encourage young entrepreneurs to take more risks earlier. By the time you're I don't know, I think I was 28 years old when I started Cameo, 29 years old. You're used to making a certain amount of money. You're on a path. You can have a career if you want to continue going with it. I think it gets harder and harder and harder in many ways to be entrepreneurial and take those risks. So for me, it was I knew I wanted to start a company, but it had to be the right idea. And when we had the idea for Cameo, I remember coming back and telling all my coworkers at LinkedIn about it, and everybody right away thought it was a great idea. And for the next 3 months, for my last quarter at LinkedIn, I was probably the worst person at the whole company, right? Somebody would call, my co-founder Martin would call me with the product idea, and I would miss a customer call. He would say you need to come out to Seattle tomorrow so we could try to sign a bunch of Seahawks up, and I would just leave and get on a plane. It's my last quarter at LinkedIn. I tell Jeff Weiner this. I was probably the worst person at the whole company. But I realized that the second I had the idea, the brain chemistry started changing. And even though LinkedIn was paying the bills, Cameo was where my heart was, my mind was, or the idea that would become Cameo, because we hadn't sold one yet. And for me, that big inflection point and kind of my river of entrepreneurship happened when I was in Nicaragua with a bunch of people that I worked at LinkedIn with, and they would give you from Christmas break through the first week of the year off. And about 10 of us went down to Nicaragua, and I remember sitting in a hot tub, and one of the guys that I worked with out of the New York office goes, "Steven, this idea is too big, and it feels like you should be doing this. If somebody else builds this company and becomes a billionaire, and you're still at LinkedIn, collecting your salary and getting free lunch, could you live with yourself?" And nobody had asked me that question yet, but it was so obvious that the answer was no, that I literally never went back. I wrote the next play letter. It's on if you go to my LinkedIn, you can actually read the letter I wrote to my team in real time. And I was kind of spelling out this vision of the marketplace that would become Cameo. And, I don't think it's crazy to understand that probably 6 of the people that worked within earshot of me at LinkedIn are now at Cameo, in key roles. And because all of those people, they just got it. They knew that I was going to be passionate about it. And a lot of them have now left to come work with me on it full time.
But Stephen, how did the idea come about? Where did you get the idea for whatever Cameo was early on?
Yeah, we had the idea for Cameo at my grandmother's funeral of all places. My co-founder, Martin, was an NFL agent at the time. and he had a player named Cassius Marsh who played for the Seahawks, who he was repping, and he could not find him any type of endorsement deal. And he was telling me about this problem. I'm driving him home to the airport from the funeral. He flew in from LA for the day, and he pulled out his phone and he showed me what we now today call the first Cameo. And in the video, Martin got Cassius Marsh to congratulate his buddy Brandon, who is very high up in Nike's marketing department, on becoming a father for the first time. And Brandon loves the Seahawks. And there's a message: Cash is wearing no shirt. He's driving in Southern California. And he goes, "Hey, Brandon, it's Cassius Marsh from the Seahawks. Heard about your son, Maverick. If he gets your athletic ability, he'll be playing for the Seahawks one day. Go Hawks." And Martin shows me this video. And like immediately, like I had the eureka moment, and it's like, dude, that's awesome. Like we should sell those. And as someone that went to Duke, who is an athlete there, who has a lot of buddies in the NBA and knew like rappers and all these different things, I could understand like why that was cool. And it was like, this is the new autograph. When you see somebody in person, you want to take a picture with them, but like here's how you get that selfie experience with someone without meeting them in real life. And that was immediately I'm like, I think there would be insatiable demand for this. The only question is, can we get talent to do this repeatedly? And that's kind of how we had the idea.
How deep did you think about the business aspect of it? Right, like obviously it's like this cool idea. Like people are gonna enjoy it, and obviously like everyone likes to hear from their favorite celebrities, especially if it's for them personalized. That's awesome. But like how did you think about the business aspect of it and how that would work? Did you do some like deep analysis on that, or was it like we'll figure it out along the way?
No, I think we just knew. Like I saw it, I'm like, this should exist. And then there's a lot that's been written about kind of Cameo's viral loop and like how the business model, like what's brilliant about it, like all that type of stuff. All I knew is like this should exist and people would want it. So like I started with that. I'm like, this is something that people would want. Now it's just a math problem. It's like, what price would people be willing to do this for? And how do we build a product that's so fun that talent would do it for free, but they get paid? So I have two co-founders. One is Martin, as I mentioned. He's a movie producer and NFL agent. But my other co-founder, Devin, I think is even more interesting when it comes to like why Cameos work. Like there's a lot written about, me and Martin's like Hollywood connections, but Devin was one of the original Vine stars. And, he's somebody that in the early days of Vine quit his job at Microsoft. Him and his best friend traveled the world, kind of were like the original travel influencers. Devin had over 1 billion loops on Vine, and his best friend, Cody Ko, had 3.6 billion loops on Vine. So these guys like became world famous, but then when they got back to the US, they were never able to monetize because Vine never built that in. So I started learning about this new class of people that were more famous than they were rich. And, that felt like it was going to be a problem, and it felt like it was a growing problem. Keep in mind, like Musically was just a bunch of 15-year-old girls, doing, lip syncing at the time. But like Instagram and YouTube and some of these platforms were starting to create new stars. And Netflix was just getting into original content, but like that would turn into the Carole Baskins and the Jerry Harrises of the world. So we had this belief that like content was exponentially increasing. And as content increased, there were just going to be more stars made, period. Right? So there are more famous people than ever before. And with more famous people, the gap between fame and monetization was going to be wider than ever. So we just felt like this was a problem that was going to grow very quickly, just as these other platforms were rising. And the other thing we always liked about the business was, in a marketplace business, you always have to decide, like, do you go for the supply side or the demand side first, the chicken or the egg question. We had really high conviction that if we got the supply on, we could get demand. Because all of our supply are famous. They had followings on social. If they joined the site, they could send a tweet out, they could send an Instagram post out, and they could turn their followers into our customers for free. So we always felt like we had that viral loop going, but it was always going to be about, could we get talent to actually do this? Because in 2016, when we founded the company, this is a very taboo idea.
That's a great point. It's something that, Pat and I have discussed too, in terms of, that chicken or egg situation that you described. Do you start off with your customers? Do you start off with, the talent in this case on Cameo? Why did you think that if you told the, athletes, actresses, whoever, who are now those people, the talent on Cameo, that they couldn't just go ahead and do this themselves by having their agents or business managers setting up a website saying, contact me for 15 minutes or whatever, and this is the payment fee, and I'll get on a call with you, right? Like, they could do that themselves, in my opinion. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Why'd you think that they wouldn't do that?
Well, two things. Number one, we started with our friends, right? So we started solving a problem for our friends. So that all the first talent on Cameo were people we knew, and we knew that they weren't going to be able to like build their own website. Like that just wasn't going to happen. And honestly, the other thought too was that the network effect of being on a platform with multiple people from multiple, Real Housewives and NFL players and comedians and television stars. We just always felt that like if we could aggregate more and more interesting, diverse networks, the flywheel of them promoting and exposing people to other people on the platform, like that would become valuable.
And so was that what it was? Was it like a domino effect? Like you started with your friends and at some point, you started approaching people outside of your network, your personal network, and they were pretty receptive to it? Like what was that conversation like with like those first few people that were not within your immediate, friend group?
Look, I mean, Cameo is a overnight success story, 4 years in the making, right? So it took a long time. I think it took us maybe 6 months to get the first 40 people on Cameo. So we started with our friends. We started building a product that we knew they liked. But I think a big turning point was when we sold the first Cameo, we got a reaction video back. So the dad, recorded his daughter and like showed that the girl was crying because she was so happy. And once we had that reaction video, it wasn't about like, hey, Mr. NFL player, you could come join this, this marketplace for fans and talent, but you're the only player on it and there's no fans there. So like, don't you want to make people feel like this? And once we had the first reaction video, then the narrative changed. And we were very fortunate that there were people out there that said yes to us when we didn't deserve them to say yes. And then we've just continued to iterate on the product and add new people. And today, we have 40,000 talent on Cameo. We have more talent than, all of the big agencies combined.
Tell us a little bit about the first days. You had this idea, you tell your buddy, you're at LinkedIn doing a horrible job because you're focused on Cameo. But when you finally leave, what's that like? I mean, was the feeling like this is going to be it? Or were you just nervous as hell thinking, damn, like maybe this might not work? Like my coworkers like this idea because they're my coworkers. I mean, like what was the thought process there?
I had absolute conviction that this was going to work. It was just a question if I was going to do it or somebody else was. I saw this. I knew that this would have to exist. There needed to be a way for talent to monetize on the internet. Direct-to-consumer monetization was still like really early for talent, but because of the power law dynamics on platforms like YouTube, where the top 3% of creators make 97% of all the ad revenue, or on Spotify, where the top 1% of musicians make 99% of the streaming revenue, it was inevitable that in a world where people are more famous than they were rich, people were going to need to find new ways to do it. And an ad-supported revenue model was not going to ultimately be the answer. So it was never about would this work? It was just like, was I going to be the person that did it? Partnered with Martin and Devin. I think we had perfect founder market fit for this business. How many like CTOs and heads of product were like Vine stars with 1 billion loops, and how many people that were out there getting talent like knew the movie industry and NFL agents. Great, but frankly, like if I was Jeff Weiner, I would have been too successful to start Cameo. If Devin was David Dobrik, and had 30 million followers on YouTube, he would have been too busy to do Cameo. If Martin was, Drew Rosenhaus and was the biggest agent in the NFL, he would have been too busy to do Cameo. So we got lucky that I think we all like were exposed and we had natural talent, but none of us had like hit a grand slam in our career yet. So in many ways, like our kind of, somewhat our like lack of early success is what gave us like the drive and determination to go run through walls and to get through a couple of tough years. I mean, for like entrepreneurs out there, I can, if I go to Stripe and I look at, what our revenue was in the first like 6 months of Cameo, right? Like I left LinkedIn in January of 2017, but we go back November 2016, $0, December 2016, $0, February 2017, $129.95. And we have a 25% take rate. I've now quit. I'm gone from LinkedIn for 2 months and we couldn't even buy lunch yet, $450 in March of 2017, $900 in April of 2017, $3,400 in May of 2017. That's now 7 months in, right? So even though it was slow, we knew we were delighting people and the feedback we were getting was great. Even though we weren't selling many cameos, people were like, this is the best thing I've ever bought. And then we just felt like if we could make one person feel like that at scale, we could make millions and hopefully billions of people feel that way.
I'm curious, what was your approach to like the pricing model? Because it's super interesting. Like, I mean, with any marketplace model, there's like a couple different ways you can go about it, right? There's just a standard set price, and then there's like a market-driven, demand-driven model, like an eBay, or we had the founder of StockX on the show, so we were kind of talking about how their platform works. But, because it's from what I've seen, and I could be wrong, it's like one flat rate, and it differs from talent, one person to the other. So how does that work? Like how do you determine, is it like a collaboration with that talent? Like how, if their one cameo is $50 versus $500, how does that work?
Every talent sets their own price. That's been, foundational to our business model since the beginning. The options trader in me wanted to help people set a good price and to always make sure that nobody could ever say this wasn't worth their time. Because if we set a price that wasn't, if they felt it was too low and they said it wasn't worth their time, they weren't going to do it. On the flip side, if we set a price that was too high and nobody bought them, that wouldn't work either. So the little Jedi mind trick that we created early was a very simplistic pricing algorithm we called earnings per minute. And I'll never forget when Andre Drummond, who was the first max salary NBA player for the Detroit Pistons at the time, joined Cameo. He's making $25 million a year. He's like, I got offered 40 grand to go to a bar mitzvah. I probably need to be 10 grand or 20 grand to do this. And I said, Andre, take 25 million, divide by 2,000 hours in a work year, 50, 40-hour weeks, divide by 60, and you actually make $208 a minute. So on Cameo, if you charge 100 or 150 bucks, you could actually make more per minute because you could do 2 or 3 of these per minute than you could as a max salary NBA player. So suddenly, for less than the cost of taking your kid to the basketball game, you could get his favorite player to speak to him. Like that was huge. And then it became real estate, right? It became like Zillow. People would look at comps and they'd say, hey, like, here's this athlete that's on my team. I'm a better player than them. I should be more. Or here's a singer that is in a rival band. Like, I think we're pretty good comps. And ultimately, like, prices become an arbiter of willingness. I always say, like, price isn't, your time value. It's really like how willing are you to do it, because you need to find a price that your fans can afford.
It's funny you brought up Zillow, because while you were talking about the whole pricing thing, I was thinking to myself, why isn't there like a Zestimate on, Cameo, where, if I have like, 10 million followers or whatever, and somebody else has 9 million, it prices it that way, or, the comps around my area, my industry, et cetera. But that's very interesting. And I think it's something that makes a lot of sense.
One thing that's interesting on that, so I think another misconception is that fame on Instagram or fame on YouTube equals like make more money than anyone on Cameo. The best people on Cameo are not equal to the most famous people we have on the platform. They're the best people at Cameo, just like Snapchat. Like DJ Khaled was like the biggest person on Snapchat, but he wasn't the biggest person on Instagram. Or the Kardashians are the biggest people on Instagram, but they're not the biggest people on Twitter. And Ashton Kutcher was huge on Twitter, but like, I don't think he's ever posted a Snapchat or Instagram, or at least I've never seen it, right? So like different mediums are perfect for different people. And on Cameo, what we found is that what works really well is either being a viral sensation, so someone like a Carole Baskins or the Tiger King cast, being a comedian, or being like an iconic actor from like a show that's just beloved, like someone like Brian Baumgartner, who's Kevin from The Office. Like those have been like really where we found product market fit. So, there's people that are way more famous than them, but, they're not earning as much money as those people are.
Right. But Steven, and this could be biased, or it could be an answer that is biased, but I'm going to ask it regardless. But don't you think that Cameo actually is a better indicator of somebody's fame because someone's actually paying for it? On Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat, I'm consuming the world is consuming their content essentially for free, right? Like I'm not paying for that service. The companies are paying for me to pay that or use that service for free. As opposed to Cameo, where because it's not necessarily the ads that are supporting it and the consumers and customers are supporting it, they're actually having to pay for the content, right? Even though it's personal. So, I mean, if you could talk a little bit about that and how Cameo's network effect is different than, or better than other platforms.
So I think it starts with the value prop with Cameo. On Cameo, the talent is getting paid to become more famous. I think that's really important. When you receive a cameo from somebody, you actually like them more than you liked them before, right? It's the analog version of Cameo is, hey, I was on the streets of Chicago and I ran into Mark Wahlberg filming Transformers, and like he was the nicest guy, right? And like if you have that experience, you're gonna go and tell everyone you've ever met, like, oh yeah, I met Wahlberg once. Like, guy was awesome. We talked for 5 minutes. On the flip side, if you meet somebody, if you met Kobe Bryant and and he like totally ignored you, then you're like, Kobe's a dick, right? So it's like that. Those little moments that people have such a huge impact on how they are. So the thing that's cool is that every time you get a cameo from someone, it's not just you that becomes a bigger fan of them, but it's like anyone you share it with, and they're all like, wow, I saw that. I saw that cameo that XYZ person made for Posh, like that, what a cool guy. Like that guy's awesome. So I think that value prop of getting paid to become more famous is a really interesting, part of our business.
I guess so. I'm sorry for like we're grilling you here, but it's just like naturally curious. I remember like back, when a lot of times we would see like these celebrities on Instagram, like they would do like these shout outs, and people would put it on their Instagram, like Complex or one of these like places would post it, like, look at Kobe Bryant did a shout out for this kid who's in the hospital or whatever, and it was like super just natural, just happened on the spot. How does that, since this is like a little bit more different where someone is paying for it and it's more like a transaction, how do you maintain that authenticity and that genuineness between the talent and the consumer?
Well, number one, the talent was always doing this for a very tiny subset of people. It might be like if you wanted to get to Kobe, like you needed to know his agent, and maybe like, if you knew his agent, you could get Kobe to do this shout out for your kid's bar mitzvah. But like that's a tiny amount of people of all the people in the world that love Kobe. Most people are never going to meet him in real life. So to me, this is the equivalent of like in the music space. You go to a concert, but like some people are going to pay to be front row, and some people are going to pay to do the VIP meet and greet and take the picture with them. In politics, right? Like a lot of people are going to vote for one politician or the other, but a subset of people pay money to go to the big dinner to take a picture with Barack Obama, right? That they're going to have, in their office forever, right? So like there's been the analog versions of this has existed forever. And Cameo, just by adding a pay gate, it's just enabled people that never had access before to have it.
You mentioned Jeff Weiner, who was the former CEO of LinkedIn, was an early investor. Did you meet him and develop a relationship with him while you were at LinkedIn, or was it a little bit after that?
I didn't know him at all. I mean, I watched him on all hands. Like I learned a lot from him by osmosis. But the person at LinkedIn that I had met a couple times was Mike Gamson, who is number 2 at LinkedIn. Essentially, he ran all. If you weren't an engineer, like you reported to Mike Gamson. And Gamson hit me up 3 months after I left LinkedIn because in my farewell letter, I wrote a story about Gamson. So on my first day at LinkedIn, Gamson's sitting in Chicago. I'm in a new hire class with probably about 100 people in Chicago, and then there's like 30 Zoom screens around the world of like the different LinkedIn offices. And Gamson, the first thing he says to all of us on my first day at work, he goes, "Welcome to LinkedIn. 2 years from today, none of you will be doing the job we just hired you for. We know that, we support that, and we literally have the profile data to prove it. Our job in the next 2 years is to make sure you get the skills you need to do your dream job. Your job is to do this job to the best of your abilities, so you set yourself up to get the next job, whether it's internally or externally. And oh, by the way, when you're ready to leave, all we ask is you recruit someone better than yourself to take your place." Like that was LinkedIn culture. That was like mind blowing to me, because when I was trading, if I had ever told my old bosses like, "Hey, like the corn pit isn't going well, like I want to go do like something else," they'd be like, "Screw you, get out of here," right? Like, but at LinkedIn, the fact that you could have these career path conversations with your manager. And if you wanted to switch teams, that you just talked about it. If you wanted to work at another company, you talked about it. That was a really cool part of the LinkedIn culture. And Gamson ended up, I wrote about that in my farewell letter, because the day I left LinkedIn was my exact 2-year anniversary. So I talked about how in my case, the Gamson prophecy was true. And he emailed me. He's like, "That's awesome. Thank you for the kind words. If I could ever be helpful, let me know." Exactly 3 months later, the first day of Q2, he pinged me just to get an update. We had a phone conversation. He just totally loved the vision. We've maybe sold about 30 of these cameos so far at the time. And Gamson, was like, "Hey, I love this business. I want to put some money in it." And at the time, we'd raised their friends and family. I told him we didn't need money. He's like, "No, Steven, I love your business. I'm going to put some investment in it." And he led a $500,000 round on the spot, and that changed everything. That enabled me to learn about to build this business in Chicago, my hometown. It gave me the confidence that someone like Gamson saw what I was up to and got it, and that started everything.
So why do you think that was? Like, I guess switching to the culture discussion now, like we mentioned earlier, you talk about how at LinkedIn they expect you to perhaps have a career change in 2 years, or even whether it's internally or externally. Why do you think that was? Why didn't they want people that were there longer? And is that something that you've applied to your own business?
Well, they literally have the profile data to prove it, right? They have every resume on earth, so they know in real time when people are switching. And I remember early somebody telling me that somebody in my generation will work for 7 different companies in their life. So it's not that they didn't want you to do it. Of course, they want everybody to work there for 20 years and have this storybook career. But they just were able to be intellectually honest, because they had the data that just said, "Hey, realistically, you're probably not going to be here." And Reid Hoffman wrote his book called The Alliance, which is all about, hey, as long as the company's path is this way and your path is this way, hey, let's make a great team. And then at some point, they might diverge, and hopefully we had a great experience on both sides. So that's a relationship forever. And I just think LinkedIn was just honest about something that every single company really has to face.
I know with COVID and everything that's been happening over the last 6 months or so, there's a lot of companies have had to pivot. I know you guys introduced new features and that kind of stuff too. So how do you see Cameo sustaining as a business over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Is it going to come with just what people want to consume and what people want from talent and that kind of stuff, or is it, I don't know, how do you envision the platform changing, not changing? How do you go about that?
Well, I think it starts with, any enduring business that's going to last 10 to 15 years must have a core business that's a cash cow that's working and continuing to grow. And then off of that, only when those unit economics are healthy, I think, can you take other bets. And, look, we're at a business that's growing 700% year over year from a year where we grew 1,000% year over year. So the core business is working, and it's working well. And one thing that's interesting is all the talent that are on Cameo, there's a lot of other things that they do to monetize. They do meet and greets, they have concerts, they play games, there's all this type of stuff. So we always articulated Cameo as the marketplace where for X amount of money, you could do Y activity with Z person. Today, we're only doing one Y activity, essentially, which is the personalized video shout out with 40,000 Z people. We believe there's 5 million Z people out there. So we have 1/3 of 1% of the total addressable market on the talent side. And we believe that that's just going to continue to grow. On top of that, of the talent that we have, there's just more things that we can do with them. And since COVID started, we've launched 2 new products, Cameo Direct, which is a product where you can text with talent. So the other day, I texted Chuck Norris to ask him a question and got an answer right back. And then Cameo Live, which is our product where you can Zoom chat with a talent as well. So these are just 2 of the many, many, many things that we could build upon. But for us, the most important thing is just continuing to acquire supply side and make it fun, make the talent love to do what we're doing, and earn trust in the core product. And then if we earn their trust by giving them a great experience on the support Cameo shout out, then they're more likely to do other things with us in the future.
How are you like as a leader? I mean, you've experienced different levels of leadership. You were a leader in certain aspects of your life and career before Cameo. But what are you like now? With a company that's 3-4 years old and growing, there are new challenges, there are new initiatives that you take on. Naturally, you probably have a lot more work that you have to do. How do you manage all that?
I saw a really good quote on Twitter from Zach from Plaid this week. I guess it was like 2 days ago, and it just really resonated with me. And he goes, and Plaid sold, for like I think $6.5 billion earlier this year. Zach went to Duke with me, so I've been watching his story, from the sidelines. But he goes, at a certain size, the job of a founder switches from building a product to building a company. It drove me crazy for a while not to be building a product directly until I realized that for a founder, the company is the product. And I think like that is so true. I hadn't articulated it like that. But, today, like my job is not to be Michael Jordan. It's to be Jerry Krause or to be Phil Jackson, right? It's to assemble an all-star team that can go have it. You have to have the vision and the mission, and you have to make sure that people are pulling on the right sides. But my job right now is like setting vision, it's setting culture, it's hiring, it's firing, it's recruiting great people, it's developing and training great and getting people out that shouldn't be there or aren't going to be able to do it. So that's a really big shift. Like I'm very rarely like calling talent anymore. Like I used to be customer service. I used to do all the marketing emails myself. Like I ran our social media. I've done every job at Cameo, but like quickly, like I've been able to fire myself from everything that I don't think I'm world class at, to just focus on the things that I think I can be uniquely great at.
How do you go about identifying the talent that you want on the platform? Because I can imagine as the role of celebrity or like the idea of celebrity changes and shifts, like you mentioned your co-founder, Devin, who was like a Vine star. Back then, no one was a Vine star. They were just on Vine. And now looking back, they were a star. Like they were the future filmmakers and, talent. And so how, as that role shifts, as the celebrity landscape shifts, I mean, we'll always have the athletes and the actors and those people, but these influencers and people that come in from different angles, like how do you identify and approach these people?
The Vine stars, I mean, look, that was purely Devin. I remember one day we had just, I think any founder when they're starting, it's always like focus, find one vertical, try to win that vertical. And Martin and I love sports. So like all we cared about were athletes, and we were trying to create a platform where backup athletes could like make off the field income essentially, right? And frankly, we never really found product market fit there. Like now they can get booked, but it wasn't until one day where Devin's like, hey, I think Cody, my roommate with 3.5 million followers on YouTube at the time, and people like Cody might do well on Cameo. And it made sense, right? If you're a Vine star or you're a YouTuber, you're in the NBA or you're in the NFL for making video content. And that's what Cameo is. So to us, like it started with that. And then we stumbled upon some other verticals like reality TV. I remember we got Sonia Morgan on. It was our first Real Housewife. Then that became a thing, and drag stars became a thing. And as we've come out, but now we've got a lot more sophisticated. In the early days, it was like, hey, we're going for sports. We need to make sure that there's one player from every team on, or one player from every city, or what, like we used to get requests. It's like, I want any athlete from Boston on Cameo, where now it's like very nuanced on who people are requesting. The other thing too is like we now have, because of the network effect, there's so much search data. So people go in and they search for different people we have, and it's not like The Rock and Taylor Swift and Justin Bieber are the only people. When all of a sudden we started seeing the name Jerry Harris pop up, it turned out that this guy was from a show Cheer on Netflix. Within a couple of days we were able to get him on, and he made 6 figures in his first month on Cameo. Or like all of a sudden the Tiger King became a thing, and we were able to really quickly go get those people on. So for us, like we've really found product market fit for people that are kind of early in their career on the upswing, or people that were super famous or were the most famous people in the world and are now, they're not, I wouldn't call them on the downswing, but they're not that person anymore, and they're more nostalgia.
I mean, what more can Cameo do, right? Like, I just think of this world that we're living in right now, like, with coronavirus and a lot of, events, a lot of the activities that we did, simple things like going to the gym, right? We can't do that. Going to the movies, you can't do that. Hanging out with a big group of friends, you can't do that. So, how can Cameo, with the talent, solve those problems?
Well, I think the answer is you. Number one, I think the hardest thing for during the pandemic is like people are like upset, they're depressed, they're lonely. So I think it starts with like we put smiles on people's faces every day, and I think that's pretty damn important. I think companies get in trouble when they try to solve every problem in the world, and for us, like very narrowly, like we want to make people extremely happy when they get a Cameo. We call cameos internally magical moments. So right now, I think we just need to be in the business of creating as many magical moments as possible. And look, I think when customers have a magical moment with us, for one thing, then they're that much more likely to try the next thing that we roll out. And on the talent side, if we've become the place where they're having that super positive experience because of the paywall, like people don't get like trolled on Cameo. You're not going to pay like $250 to tell someone they suck, which you can do for free on Instagram or Twitter. So like as we keep layering these like great delightful experiences on both sides, as we have ideas like we did with Cameo Live or with Cameo Direct, then we roll those out and we let people try that, and if there's product market fit, we roll it out deeper.
That would be pretty funny. Is like finding someone that is like known to be like a super nice dude or like a nice girl, and just like have them just berate the other person.
I mean, hey, like especially with these elections coming up, if you can get Biden and Harris and Trump and Pence on there, and people from the opposite party have to pay and they complain to them, it could be a donation to their campaign or something. Like, talk about a business opportunity there.
We're working on that stuff right now.
Yeah.
We've had candidates of both parties come to us because think about all those big ticket fundraisers that are gone, right? The
Right.
John Legend, $10,000, I'll play piano for Barack Obama type events, right? Like those aren't happening today, and that's a lot of money missing. And especially celebrities, they're on both sides of the aisle have been forever kind of used as fundraising. So we've had people on both sides of the aisle come to us and say, hey, how can we use Cameo to raise money and to replace some of this kind of lost fundraising revenue that we would have got from those type of events?
One thing I think about is Instagram, encouraged all these people to become influencers, right? And YouTube encouraged all these people to become YouTubers and sing, and Twitch with gamers. What is that opportunity for Cameo? Is it the idea that you can become a celebrity and you can create an audience that will pay you for your content, or just to simply even talk to you, right? Is there that sort of opportunity for people to start people like me, regular people like me and Pat, right, to make money without having to be an A-lister or a bench player on the Los Angeles Lakers, right? I'm curious if that's an opportunity for people to really develop a true career.
Look, I think you're getting paid to become more famous, right? So that's our big value prop. But I would say that like, look, TikTok and Instagram and SoundCloud, there's other platforms today that are better to like blow up on. I look at the other platforms as the farm system for Cameo, right? So like this week and last couple of weeks, people have been asking, hey, are you happy that TikTok is going to get banned, or Microsoft buys them, whatever is going to happen? Like, no, like TikTok is creating more creators who need to come to Cameo because they're not able to monetize on TikTok, right? So the pure supply, any of the platforms, they're creating more famous people who overwhelmingly, because of those business models, aren't making money. So they come to Cameo to basically, be their monetization engine. So the more people blow up on other platforms, then they come to Cameo to cash it in.
I'm curious with your like experience, whether it's just kind of knowledge of sports and kind of being in that space, or like filmmaking and that kind of stuff, producing, maybe something else. What do you see, or what are you most excited about in the next like 5 to 10 years post COVID-19? What's something that you've been thinking about where you're like, I'm excited to see this happen?
Like in entertainment and sports, like where? Like, give me an example.
It could be anything, just kind of where the future is headed in any of these like spaces that you're particularly interested in or like consume often.
I mean, I think gaming is just going to continue to get bigger and bigger. Esports, like I think, is now it's like for a while it was like a secret, and then all of a sudden now it's like hotter than hell because Twitch has blown up so much since the pandemic. But I think esports is just going to continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm excited for things like Little Michaela, who's like this influencer that's like not a real person, and I think that. I think companies are going to create like there's another one called Crypt TV that's making like the next generation of like horror characters. I think like getting into characters and intellectual property behind them is going to be really important going forward. And I think the technology's picking up where like you could have someone like Lil Michaela who isn't a real person be like the star of a movie one day. And like as a company, if you created that asset, you don't have to pay the actor. Like CAA signed, Lil Michaela, I think, and that, to me was like really, really interesting. So I think you're going to see sports get like a lot more interactive. I just invested in a company called Streamlayer that basically is like, well, what should watching sports look like in 2020, right? Because it's kind of looked the same, for at least as long as I can remember. Like, you've got the bar on the bottom and the stat tracker, but like, people want to have conversations with other, fans. They want to, know how their sports bets are doing. They want to see how their fantasy players are going. So, Streamlayer wants to build just like a skin on top of the broadcast that's like having all that interactive things that you want to do. But, normally you'd have to like flip on, turn your computer on or get into your iPad and not watch the game. But like, how do you have all that information right there? So those are things I'm excited about in sports and entertainment. I also think the other thing is with movies, in a world where like people decide not to go back to movie theaters, what is going to happen? Like, on the OTT space that allows, kind of direct to consumer, monetization for movies. So the studios themselves are going to be distributing, movies, and Disney has done some interesting things since the pandemic with some of the movies. But I think that's here to stay, and I wouldn't want to be owning movie theaters right now.
Stephen, and these could perhaps be your final thoughts on today's podcast. But you talked about early on how the idea for Cameo came about, or what kind of sparked that, right? It was that text from the friend, the football player, to the new father. For those that are listening, and we like to call them entrepreneurs or future entrepreneurs or whatever, how can they identify ideas that could turn into businesses in their daily lives? Because what happened to you wasn't like unordinary. Like, I mean, sure, you were able to identify it, but there's probably hundreds of things that happen throughout our lives, thousands, millions, that can be potential business ideas, right? Yeah. How does one put themselves, whether it's in that mindset, or how do they even recognize what can be a business?
I think there's a good framework that the Japanese have called Ikigai that I think does a good job of helping you understand like what are those opportunities you should go for. And imagine a Venn diagram, but instead of with 2 circles, with 4, right? So, and it's the intersection point of what do you love to do? What are you great at? What does the world need? And what can you get paid to sell, essentially, right? And you have to find something at the intersection of those points. If you're great at something, you love to do it, the world needs it, but they won't pay for it, you're just going to be a missionary. You're never going to have a real business. On the flip side, if you're doing something that that the world will pay for, that the world needs, that you're great at doing, but you don't love, then you're a mercenary. And I think you have to be a missionary versus a mercenary to work in an entrepreneurial setting. Like, it might take years and years and years before you can pay yourself, and you're going to have to forego a lot of income and go to your friends and family and ask them for money, and you're probably going to like lose their money, right. The first few times you try to do stuff. But like, my advice would be like, if it's in an area that you would do for free, like, then you should, if it's an area that like whatever job you're doing, right, if you're daydreaming about something else, just like find something in the area that you find play and make that your work. And I think I think that's probably the best advice. Normally, for other audiences, I'll tell people, unless they have absolute conviction that like they couldn't live with themselves unless they won, I would tell them not to do it. But for the entrepreneurs, like, shit, like if you got an idea, like just go for it. Like who gives a shit? Like all you're giving up is whatever money you put in and some time, but like you're gonna, take some reps, swing and miss, and like and just keep iterating. That's what I would do.
It's funny. You're probably the fifth or sixth person on the show who's mentioned the term ikigai. So perhaps we have to call, and we've written an article on it. We both read it. So perhaps we got to, write a new book or maybe start a new podcast called Finding Ikigai or something. Because that seems to be, when people ask us, what's the similarity of all these founders, 150 plus founders that we've interviewed at this point? It's literally those four things. You and several others were able to identify it as ikigai, but at the end of the day, making money is a big part of it. The world needing it and solving a problem is a big part of it. But I think most importantly, it's like, do you enjoy doing it? Do you want to wake up every single morning excited for something that could be the most mundane task? Like, I don't know, answering an email or, writing some notes down or whatever it may be, right? It's not fun every day, but are you excited to wake up and make sure that boring task at the end of the day is still going to be fun for you, right? And I think that you've clearly found that, and several of the people that we've interviewed have found that. And
I heard. It's funny. I was interviewing a CFO candidate this week, and she told me she gave me one other framework that I thought was really interesting. And she said that somebody told her a long time ago that the surest way to make a fortune in your life is to work with four other super talented people. So have five super talented people stick together for 5 years working together. And it's like most startups die from suicide, not by homicide. I'm blessed to have co-founders that, I think like we really complement each other well. And then, there's a couple early employees like, Arthur, who's employee number one, or COO, who's just like, we look at him as a co-founder, right? And I think, the fact is like we're now in year 3, almost year 4 of that. And I think it's totally true. Find a group of 5 people that you want to work with for 5 years and just stick together. And I think good things will happen when you do that.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much for your time, Steven. We love seeing what Cameo has done, especially during these last 6 months of COVID. We would have never seen this coming, obviously, but it's great to see companies and entrepreneurs like yourself that have gone above and beyond what what they were doing to really improve the lives of others and bring joy in people's lives. And at the end of the day, that's, I think, something that everybody will remember once this is all said and done, is the joy that you brought them, the way that you made them feel. And I think that, Cameo is definitely a platform that does that. And I think that's a massive lesson for people to take away, is that if anything you do in life, whether it's your life, your business, and relationships, if you make other people happy, that is a huge win. And that's just going to lead to more wins. So thank you for your time, for your advice, for your wisdom. And, hopefully we can keep in touch, and hopefully we can meet in person one day as well.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Steven.